Sure. My name is Alina, and I'm a professor and a supervising attorney at the Immigrant Rights Clinic at NYU Law School.
Okay. So why did you decide to go into immigration law?
Well, as the daughter of immigrants and a woman of color, it was really important to me to learn how to use law as a tool for social change. I knew that there was a lot of racial injustice in this country, and I wanted to learn how to do something about it. And then when I came to law school, I was a student in the Immigrant Rights Clinic, which I now teach, and really saw firsthand the way that our nation's laws really discriminate against and marginalize immigrants and communities of color. So I decided to go into that field after law school.
That's amazing. So what do you do? What did you do in your job?
Well, I co-teach the Immigrant Rights Clinic, which is a law school clinic, meaning that law students are getting their firsthand experience in representing immigrants and immigrant rights organizations in their campaigns. So we work with immigrants who are facing deportation, either because they're kind of targeted by federal immigration officials when they're traveling or even in their homes, or because they've had some sort of interaction in the criminal justice system. And the way the laws work is that immigrants really face kind of a double punishment. So we come in at that stage to try and protect their rights and defend their ability to stay in the country. And we also work with organizations that are really fighting campaigns and for policy changes and really trying to advance their own rights as immigrant communities.
So do you feel that coming from a home where there were immigrants, you have kind of like a different perspective? How do you feel like that affects your job?
Well, I definitely come into work every day with the perspective of a woman of color, what it means to grow up in this country and be viewed differently based on people's perceptions of what it means to be an American. And I think there's a real collective experience that many immigrants have, and people who come from those families, whether you're born here or not, if you consider America your home, you want to be treated that way. You want to be treated as an equal, as somebody who has every bit of passion and love for this country as anyone else, and who has the right to have our views expressed. And so when I see the way that immigrants are treated, and I really do think it's based in a lot of structural racism and the way the country really views who does and doesn't belong here, it really hits home because I know that's something that affects my family and affects people that I very much care about. So I definitely come into work with that personal perspective. But I think that anyone who wants to go into this work to fight for immigrant rights can bring in their own personal perspectives because it's about kind of human rights and the fundamental liberties that we should all have.
So do you think that, what do you think it means to be American?
Well, I think it's about owning your sense of place, and there are people who grow up here in New York City every day, regardless of where they were born, who are New Yorkers, and that's as much a part of their identity as, you know, their culture, language, religion, culture, all of the things that we think of when we define ourselves. And, you know, particularly doing this work in New York, it's exciting because being a New Yorker and being an American really means celebrating our differences and what we bring to the country and what we bring to our communities. And so I think it's really about self-definition and what people define as their home. And immigrants, a lot of immigrants who are being targeted by immigration laws are people who very much consider the United States their home and have put as much into this country as anyone else has. So I think it's really about, you know, owning your place and really feeling like this is your home, and anyone can really be an American if you use that kind of definition.
So do you think, how do you take your perspective when you're dealing with the cases that you do deal with?
Well, it's hard because the laws are so arbitrary. So, like, everyone has a friend or a cousin or a coworker or someone who's been caught up in the immigration system, and it's really fundamentally unfair. So when I speak to somebody who, like, walks into our office and they explain their story is often like everyone else's story. You know, people who came to the country when they were kids, or people who immigrated later and have really tried to make a life here. And then something happens, everything changes, and suddenly they see themselves locked up in immigration detention or having to go to immigration court to try and prove why they get to stay here, when half the time the laws don't even let them kind of bring that evidence to a judge. So it's really difficult to talk to people about the way the laws work because they are unfair. And the experiences that people are having with this system are just so incredibly unjust that it's often the first experience that someone has with the American justice system, and it really surprises people. You know, most people think everyone gets a day in court, like if something happens, you'll get to explain yourself, explain, you know, why you should get to stay here. And for a lot of people, the system doesn't work that way.
So, what do you think what do you think, how do you think education plays a role in the lives of immigrants? Like, for example, people who come here when they're younger as immigrants and spend their whole lives in schools here. What do you see in those types of situations?
Well, education's really important to individuals, to families, and to the community as a whole. It's really a bedrock of like any society, and so many people come to the U.S. for education. I know my parents came here because they wanted to, you know, have a better education and make sure their children had those opportunities. And it's something that's just inherently good for everyone. Like, an educated person is able to fulfill their dreams and contribute more to their family members and their neighborhoods and their communities. So there are so many young people who come here and they work so incredibly hard and they achieve, you know, great grades, and they're studying and they have these dreams. And what's heartbreaking for me is to see people in that moment where they realize that their immigration status might actually be a barrier to achieving those dreams. And that, I think, is really unfair. And for those people who aren't supportive of the efforts that so many people have worked on to get young people, you know, an ability to get legal immigration status and to basically find their place here in America, I think they should sit down with kids who find themselves at that crossroads and really kind of see with their own eyes what it means to suddenly find out that everything that you plan for your future isn't going to be achievable just because of some laws that were written a long time ago, very unfairly, that, you know, people want to change but haven't yet.
So, what do you think that the structural racism you were talking about is like a major factor in like why immigrants are not, you know, getting to the same places that non-immigrants and like people who aren't of color are?
I definitely think structural racism is a huge factor in the barriers that immigrants are facing to achieving equal rights. There's certainly a segment of the American population, like in every society, that both strongly believes that America should look a certain way, and that white Americans are the people who belong to this country and are the founding fathers and basically the foundations for a lot of our laws, and people have fought very hard over many, many years in many different movements to achieve equality, and we've come a long way in dismantling a lot of the most obvious and stark racial barriers. So today's laws, it's very difficult to write a law that blatantly and explicitly discriminates against people based on the color of their skin. But what we've seen, especially in the immigrant rights movement, is that for very blatant racist reasons, people have now been proposing laws that target people based on the color of their skin, just without saying it that way. And that's what we're seeing in a lot of states like Arizona and Alabama, where you have a select few politicians who've managed to get these laws passed that really go after black and brown people, whole communities of color. And while they don't say that it's based on the color of their skin, they turn everyone into immigration agents and basically pit, school teachers and business owners and police officers against their community members by making them try and enforce immigration laws when the only thing that most people have to go on is their own prejudices and assumptions about who is an immigrant and who's not. And so whenever you have laws that set up a system where, you know, the color of your skin can become a factor, that's where you see kind of the structures really supporting racist notions and making it difficult to achieve any sort of fairness in immigration law.
So do you think the DREAM Act is a result of all this injustice and, you know, like, forced, like, structural racism?
Well, the DREAM Act is an incredibly important component of a whole series of changes that need to happen to the current immigration laws to make the system just a little bit more fair. I mean, it's a really modest request by an amazing group of young people who just want to achieve the American dream. They just want to be able to further their education and have this country recognize the fact that since they were very young, they've already considered this country their home. So the DREAM Act is among, one would think, the very most modest of proposals that people are putting forth for immigration reform. And it's one that has gotten a lot of bipartisan support and would allow a lot of youth, many youth of color, to be able to achieve equality in this society. So it's certainly a huge step in correcting some of the problems that we see in immigration law today.
So do you think... Hold on, let me gather it.
What other changes would you add to the DREAM Act? What other things need to change besides that?
Well, the DREAM Act certainly is a step in the right direction for a lot of youth who have been working hard in school and who've come here as young people and want to further their education. Like a lot of laws in immigration law, its reforms are somewhat limited. I work with a lot of young people who have had some sort of interaction with the criminal justice system, and I would love to see a DREAM Act that really incorporates them. I think the federal immigration laws, as they're currently written, are incredibly harsh. They're ruthless. People are detained and deported, and American families are broken up every day with no safety valve, because for most people you don't get that chance to tell an immigration judge or any official why you shouldn't be deported. So that concept of discretion, it's like a fundamental piece of American justice to have that due process, should be restored for everyone. And that means whether it's kids who are facing the situation or adults, whether it's because you don't have status or because you do have status but have made some sort of mistake in your lifetime, everyone deserves a chance to present their equities and their positive factors in front of a judge. So I would really like to see not only the DREAM Act get passed, but a lot of the measures that people have been proposing to put back due process and a day in court for all immigrants who might be facing deportation.